Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. It's been an interesting week in the world of gaming. If you are a God of War fan, it's been a pretty terrible week, and I apologize. Some interesting news coming out for God of War. We're gonna, and I have some thoughts, right? We're gonna touch on the set photos that were released for the God of War TV series that will be airing on Amazon. But before we get to that, I want to discuss the gaming news first because I think that's just really fascinating and ties really well into what we've been discussing on the channel so far in the last um, series of videos that I've done. All right. Kratos has been one of those characters that has sort of, you know, reshaped the gaming, industry when he came on the scene, sort of the unapologetic masculine character, and one of the last bastion of masculine characters as it is now. We've seen what has happened over the course of the last few years, whether it's Joel or Master Chief, and so we see the direction that they're going in service of this message, right? Of inclusivity and so on. But let's get in. Let's dive into it, right? We'll just go through this article and see what they have in store for us. God of War sequel leaks explain who's replacing Kratos. One of the most influential game franchises in recent history is God of War. Blah 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 blah. The leaks are to be believed Kratos will not be the main character of the next God of War game. Furthermore, rather than introducing a completely new protagonist, a previously established character could be set to take on a starring role, at least for a single game. This change is sure to raise some eyebrows among the fans and is poised to point the classic franchise in a boldly different direction. Yeah, no kidding. It certainly raised some eyebrows. Um, Here's who the purported God of War leaks reveal as the protagonist has replaced Kratos. According to the leaker, Nate the Hate, in a post on X, the protagonist of the rumored God of War sequel will be Fate. So, Fate, right? As for those of you who have obviously played the game or not, you've probably heard or seen gameplay pertaining to this character. During Kratos' sort of flashback, uh, Kratos' wife, and that is the direction we are now taking God of War. Playing as Kratos' wife. Now, why, might you ask? Who do you want to play as Kratos' wife? Uh, it's as I've said before here, we're getting to the point where we have to have some certain uncomfortable truths. And the reality is, if you've seen what Santa Monica Studios now looks like, then this should not surprise you, right? This should not be a surprise to you. And I would say, firstly, I know there have been some people were hoping that we would have gotten to play as Atreus, instead of, I guess, whatever this is that we'll be getting. But either one would have been a step down. Either one would have been a step down, right? Atreus hasn't been the most beloved or well received character so far in the last two games. And again, the reasons have been obvious. For the same reason we're getting Faye here, there is a concentrated effort to try to soften the edge of all these characters, particularly the male characters. And you've seen that happen with Kratos over the course of the last two games as well. I did not like any of the last two games. Played some of the first, and I did not play Ragnarok at all, and I never will. Right? When the Again, once you see the trend of what is happening with these characters, that these beloved characters, and there's this desire to deconstruct them to the point where they've become unrecognizable, right? And that is what Kratos has become. I've seen some arguments to say that Kratos is older now, and that is it makes sense for him to get to this point that he is now. And I think that argument is completely ridiculous. It is completely ridiculous because it's not just that they're trying to emasculate him, which they definitely are, but they paint Kratos to be somewhat inept, as though this is his first time having a family. But and his relationship with Atreus is just god awful to me. But it's that idea of that what Kratos has learned over the course of his journey, and created the man that he is now. It's the idea that you know everything there is just wrong. Everything he learned is wrong, and we need to deconstruct that and teach him the correct way. And you see this not just in gaming, but in all your favorite male characters in entertainment. You see the same thing in Star Wars with Luke Skywalker. Um, you know, um, Joel is the same thing. Indiana Jones is the same thing. All these male characters that had this hard edge to them previously, they're being told that your views are outdated or archaic, and this is now the correct way. And this is not coincidental. It's very much intentional, and that is the direction that they're trying to take Kratos himself as a character. Uh, and the idea that we need to view this character's past through a modern lens and then judge him accordingly is going to be the death of a lot of these characters, unfortunately. Right? It goes on to say here, this comes with reports that Santa Monica's studio, or Santa Monica, is working on a spin-off set in the God of War universe with the franchise longtime director Core Bartlog. The resulting game reportedly will lean heavier into action than post-2018 mainline games that have been set in Scandinavia. Additional reports indicate that the currently unconfirmed game is targeting a release window within the first half of 2027. As a reminder, Faye is the second wife of Kratos and the mother to his son Atreus, with the character played by Deborah Ann Wall in God of War Ragnarok. This character, from a lot of the conversations I see happening online, there are a lot of, I don't know what to call these people. They're definitely not fans. Saying that, wouldn't it be cool to see Faye face off against Thor and fight him to a stalemate while he's. Why would I want to see that? Why would I want to see that? The game is called God of War. People want to see the God of War, and this idea that we need to, replace the male protagonist with a woman, and I've seen the argument so much, trying to say it's not because she's a woman, it's because we want to play as God of War. That is a part of it, yes, but it is also because she's a woman. Like I said on this channel, we were not going to stray away from uncomfortable conversations here. It is partly because she is a woman. At the end of the day, the God of War was made by men for men. We do. What interest would there be to now want to play as a female character? I feel this particular part of the conversation gets lost. So, or it's taken to some extremes or exaggerations that make absolutely no sense. This idea that men and women do not have different interests, and from a corporate standpoint, the aim here really is, sell this idea that men and women have the same interests. That way, it's easier for us to sell our product because we're not making a product catering to any one demographic. Men and women are the same, so they will enjoy the same thing and consume the same content. That's what they're thinking. And to hear gamers regurgitate the same nonsense, it shows that the message is working on some level, but biologically, it just will not work. As I've said before, you can review some of the other videos that I've done on this subject, examining how men and women explore the world or live the world. And if we're creating a product here that is meant to immerse the player into the world, asking me to jump into the body of a woman, see things through her perspective, make decisions that she would make that I would not make, in any scenario that a woman would make, it is not immersive. It just is not. So it is partly because she's a woman. Um, and those weirdos who want to play dress up and put clothes on these female characters, you guys are a part of the problem, right? You are a part of the problem. This game is called God of War. The character should be a man. It should be the God of War or whatever he, if it is Atreus, I suppose, and I'm not too thrilled about that. But if he's taking on that role as the new God of War or something to that effect, then sure. But this game was designed, made by men for men, and it needs to remain that way, right? And then there's this, obviously, the other argument that I raised earlier about wanting to see Faye fight Thor, and it's the same narrative that they're pushing. That okay, look at this girl boss woman who can fight toe to toe with the God of War, and I feel there's just so much incompetence in video gaming now. It's just baffling because I've seen some of these arguments on Twitter and that would it not be cool? And then when they're pressed and asked why would you want to play as Faye, the response is, but she gave Kratos his axe. So wouldn't it be cool to see how Kratos got his axe? First off, we don't need to see the backstory for every single activity that takes place in the game. Why is that even necessary? That's the first problem. But secondly, obviously this was written intentionally. We didn't need the axe to come from her per se, or we don't need to see that she's some powerful axe wielding warrior that can take down a big man. It's all of this is written intentionally, and it's why I didn't particularly love the first God of War game, or not particularly. I hated it because you saw the elements that they were painting, that they were dropping in the game, and with Freya, for example, and how she was being painted, right? As this, she was essentially a modern feminist shoved into this mythological world. That's all Freya was, and over the course of that game, again, as I've said, you saw where Kratos was constantly being challenged by his small son, or his wife needed to provide him with guidance in one direction or another. After everything that Kratos has experienced, we should be learning from him, right? We should be learning from him. But what they desire is this rhetoric that older male characters have nothing to offer but replacement, right? And they will be replaced by their betters, or they will have women guide them in the correct direction because they've been on the wrong path their entire life. It's essentially turned God of War into a therapy session. And as I've said before, this is what you get when you have feminized the gaming space, is that you're going to have more dialogue and plot that's driven or written like it's a lifetime drama. That is what you will get. And in large part, a lot of that is what God of War 1 is, and God of War, the recent God of War, the two games. That's what they are. They are a giant therapy session. That's it. All right, this goes on. Let's skip through that. Why fans were expecting a different replacement? Yeah, we went through this briefly with Atreus, and the last two games have obviously been building up toward him being a replacement. Him sort of being, well, not sort of, he is low key, right? And obviously, there's some liberties being taken with Greek mythology here, with Kratos jumping from one pantheon to the next, and now I don't even think Kratos was he's not actually the god of war in either mythology. So it's interesting to see where we've ended up, where he's now Loki's father. Uh, it's all very strange, but yeah, some people might have been expecting Atreus to make that jump. But as I've said, he was just not a very likable character, and that comes back to the same feminization of these stories that we talk about. Because in the same way that women cannot raise sons, they cannot write them. And again, this is not a blight on women per se, but you need male figures to, sort of drive where growth for young boys and boundaries and discipline. And you can see that all of those traits are missing from Atreus, right? It feels as though he was being raised by his mother all along, in which case it's painting Kratos as a terrible father because where has he been and why hasn't he had that impact that he should on his in his son's life? But that is what it's sort of painting Kratos to be by just looking at what Atreus has become, this uncertain, ineffective, whining little boy. That is what that's the boy that they have raised, and it shows a failure on Kratos' part. But largely it shows the perspective of the people now writing God of War, which again a lot of women are now in the writers' room, and women do not know what it is like to be a boy, do not know what it is like to be a man, and so they cannot write one. And you get this whimpering character in Atreus, and that's a result of women interpreting what they believe a young boy should be. And it's terrible to actually see where we are heading with this character, unfortunately. But it goes on to say Ragnarok ended with Atreus parting ways with his father to find any surviving giants, while Kratos learned to forgive himself for his violent and spiteful past. That's that's what I'm talking about. This is the aim, right? For Kratos to apologize for his violent and spiteful past. And I don't know. I've said this a number of times. Gamers now need to be a bit mindful of what they support with their wallet, because these these studios will continue to push this rhetoric, and if you give them even just an inch, they will take it and take so much more. And that is what you're seeing play out in real time here, because for the last two games, they crossed a lot of boundaries, made a lot of changes to Kratos, the world as it is, and the injection of a lot of those characters that are inclusivity or quotas that they needed, or that boxes they needed to check. Right? They did a lot of that in the last two games, and you said, okay, I'm going to buy it. And that is the problem. The moment you start making these exceptions and allowing them to, cross the line, you're giving them permission. You're saying that I'm okay with this change. It's fine. Do whatever you want. And so they've done whatever they wanted because you've given them the money to do that. So gamers, we do have to draw a line at some point and say no more. And the moment we see any hint of this, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the moment we see evidence of this, you do not buy the product. Do not buy it. Right? That is the only way you're going to save gaming. You cannot keep making these exceptions, because if you do, this is the natural end result. You're going to end up playing as a woman, or a very feminized version of Kratos, or any of the characters that you've loved or played over the years. That is where you will end up. So it's an unfortunate, you know, it's unfortunate to see where things are heading, where gaming is concerned. But I will put it uh, to you this way: Would you, between the Atreus that we've gotten and the one we deserved, would you have preferred to have played the game as this Atreus or that Atreus? Right? That's the question that you need to answer. And if it's the latter, then you need to make some hard choices here and decide you will no longer support these games if they continue to push this message, versus staying true to what the character and who the character actually is.